All right, we're just gonna give it like 1 more minute. I think I'm starting to see some people join here and we'll get started. Okay, Morgan, I think we can go ahead and get started. Yeah, welcome everybody. For those of you that are just joining us, we have Morgan here today who's going to walk us through some usability testing 101. If you have questions as we're going through, please drop them in the chat and I will be asking Morgan those questions as soon as she's done with this presentation. But go ahead, Morgan, take it away.
Awesome. Okay, thank you, Maka. Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Morgan, and I work as a full-time UX researcher. Actually, I work for Oracle and I work for FedEx. So usability testing is definitely something we do on a regular basis. So I hope to condense all things usability testing to get you guys started and hopefully get you on the right track to when you apply your own usability testing. So let's go ahead and get started. I already introduced myself. Okay, so preparation, let's talk about before you actually even get started for the usability testing, because that's very important. Making sure to dedicate time for what your overall objective is for the test is crucial. Essentially, what are you looking for? What are you hoping to accomplish? What are, these research questions that you have, and now that you have a prototype and something you want to test with, what are you hoping or expecting? And when I say that, what I'm referring to is, are you simply trying to test and see, does our prototype work? What are some things? What are we open to? What are, any other opportunities? To be open-minded, I think, as a moderator and a tester is crucial as well. You don't want to go into creating a test expecting the results to be what you want them to be. That's opposite of the purpose of usability testing, is to basically define opportunities and find solutions. And so making sure that the questions, the tasks are clear, that match your overall objective. For example, there are several different types of tests. Do you want this primarily to be a test where you're just trying to find, generative results or opportunities for features or whatever it may be? Or is this a test where you're specifically trying to test a feature? And this is important to know. This is important to decide whether you're working, on your teams or individually, of what exactly you're looking for, because that's going to define what type of test you're going to create. As I mentioned, whether it's going to be just generative questions, or if it's a task analysis. You are trying to test a specific feature or application, and you want to make sure that can the user go from point A to point B? Does it make sense? That can he or she actually complete it? And so as you're writing out those tasks, sometimes it's also important to brainstorm or outline what exactly is the task realistic. Are we going to give the user, the participant, a full-blown, is this task going to take like an hour to complete? Is it going to take like 15 minutes to complete? Every participant is going to take a different amount of time as they're trying to complete the task. But you also want to make it a task that's realistic for them to complete. It shouldn't necessarily be like an impossible guessing game. And with that being said, I'll talk about this further along, where we talk about the differences between moderated and unmoderated tests. But another feature to consider is including segments. What I mean by segments are different types of groups of people. I can give you a perfect example with FedEx. We do usability testing often, and we usually try to test with different groups of people. And we identify different groups of people by those who are people who frequently ship packages or envelopes, and those who do not, who are infrequent shippers. Because FedEx, as you know, provides several services: shipping, printing, and packaging, and the like. And so there is a specific feature they're trying to test with their shipping website, or their shipping feature on their website. And so we primarily test with those two different segments. We want to know, how does this test with those who are constantly shipping and those who are not? Because we need to cover our bases. We need to consider, other audiences, so to speak. And then tapping into time frame. Again, we're talking about how realistic is the test to complete and the time frame. Do we want this to be a test that's going to last an hour? No, probably not. And so it also refers to how many days, or realistically, how quickly can you prepare and execute a usability test? And the answer is you can actually do this very quickly. You can do it definitely within a week's timeline. Again, bringing FedEx as an example, they use usertesting.com to recruit and to test. Basically, we set up the screeners, and the system basically finds people that fit within, our demographics. And then we already have a test set up where they are given, those who are already screened are given the test, and they're able to, the platform's able to find and recruit people honestly within a day, sometimes with less than a day. Now, of course, you're thinking of, well, okay, that's usertesting.com. Like, of course, it's a big platform a useful tool that can do that in no time. But there still are additional tools that even have free services where you can do the same. And even if you want to just do it on your own and create your own test, usability test without necessarily using a platform, it's still possible to get people to test and become participants within a very short time frame. Much similarly to how you would execute a survey. When you prepare the survey and you send it out, whether you use social media platforms to get participants to take the survey, it's kind of the same approach. Already having your usability test set up, and then if you want, you can use social media platforms to get it out there, or if you want to test specifically with your participants only that you've screened for a survey, then you can do that as well. It really does depend, again, on how you want to test. If you want to begin your research by using a usability test, because again, you're looking for opportunities because you may have something in mind, or if you want to go straight from already surveying a group and then testing with that same group. There's different approaches, and we can talk more about that at the end of the presentation. So let me continue. The most important thing, regardless of which approach you take, is, I would say, troubleshooting. What I mean by this is, especially if it's a task analysis test, in our minds, we might be going through and creating the test and thinking, okay, like, oh, after, if I was the user, this is how I would sign in, this is what I would click. In our own minds, it makes sense, but we need to constantly remember that we are not the user. And the test and the task that we might be creating with certain instructions may not make sense. It may make sense to us because we are already familiar with the product or the service, but our user is not. And so it is totally fine to do the best that you can for your first, I would say, test draft of creating a task or a test where the questions or instructions are clear and concise and in the right order. And then testing it with one or two participants. And I would say if you're deciding to use different segments, do that for each segment as well, because that way you can see where there are any issues, any misunderstandings, misinterpretations, and you can tweak and adjust and assess of what exactly is, is it understandable, or maybe I'm asking the wrong question, or maybe my instructions for the tasks are unclear. And this is a perfect opportunity for you to make that adjustment before you start sending out the test to, a handful of people, because then you're going to get really skewed results and it's not going to help you. That data is not going to be beneficial. So now I'm going to talk about the two different types of usability tests. There's the moderated and the unmoderated. Basically, the main difference is moderated is that you are there, whether in person or virtually, observing while the test is being performed. And you could, with moderated, interact or not. What I mean by that is there are moderated tests where you can just be an observer. However, the participant is aware that they are being observed, whether or not you're directly asking them questions and interacting with them. So just keep that in mind. And the moderator is the person who is moderating the session. They are the ones typically addressing the questions or the instructions. The benefits, the pros to having moderated usability testing is being able to ask questions, further questions in real time. So let's say you recognize or you realize something that's going on, and it gives you the opportunity to kind of go off script. You can follow your script of questions, but let's say, you see an opportunity based on somebody's body language or how they're interacting with your prototype, and it gives you an opportunity to ask further, to give you more context into what's going on. A con would be that simply by knowing that they are being watched or observed could create an uncomfortable environment for a participant. We don't know exactly 100% how every single person is going to react or what their behavior is going to be when they know they're being watched. But for the most part, you can't heavily rely that their reactions or responses will be as realistic or as natural as it could be if they knew they weren't being watched. So on the flip side, we have on moderated usability testing, which is essentially the opposite. The moderator and or observers are not present during this test. The participant simply knows that the session is being recorded, and that's it. But nobody is watching and nobody is actually interacting in real time. So the obvious con to this is not being able to ask those questions for more further context, or not missing those opportunities to find more context in the moment, right? However, participants tend to interact and behave a little bit more comfortably because they know they're not being watched. And so it creates an opportunity for them to be and to behave more naturally. So now let's talk about after the usability test, the analysis part. Now this can be, you know, a rabbit hole all in of itself, just talking about the analysis and synthesis part. So I'm just going to talk about a brief overview for the beginning. Is what would you immediately do after your sessions, your testing sessions? I would say it is key to be very organized, because depending on, it doesn't really necessarily depend on how many people you're going to test with. Regardless, organization is key. You're going to get a lot of information, whether that's through, you know, metrics, or whether it's through qualitative data. And so you need to find, and this is where you have the liberty to decide how you want to organize, you know, kind of like a method to your madness. And what I mean by that is, after sessions, whether they're moderated or unmoderated, should always be recorded. Because it's, I don't know about you, but it's very difficult to be asking questions and listening and writing at the same time. And you don't want to miss anything. You don't want it to be an awkward interview session if you are doing a moderated session with someone where you're like, okay, hold on just a second, let me like write this down while they're like in mid-sentence. So I would just say, you know, hold off on the note taking, just record it. Obviously ask for permission to record it, whether it's through video or just voice recording, because you're going to be going back and forth again and again, listening and re-listening to those recordings and trying to really, you know, extract the important data that you need. Everything should be recorded, then taking the opportunity to start listening to recordings. Again, you know, depending on what type of test it is, obviously, if you're trying to watch, you know, someone's behavior and how they're interacting with your prototype through video, is definitely 100% necessary and essential. But if you're not, and you're just, you know, using some type of, I would say, recording that's not with a computer and instead with a camera or phone, I mean, record as much as you can, as much screen time as you can, to really see like how they're utilizing the prototype. But either way, this is your opportunity to kind of create your own tagging system. And whether that's through colors, code names, whatever works for you, writing things down on sticky notes, writing things down on notepads, or using just, you know, typing notes on a computer, whatever you want to use to organize important notes or insights that stand out to you. It's going to seem like a lot in the beginning, but then as you keep going by one, you will be able to organize a little bit more into groups or categories that are important information for you. Also keeping in mind is highlighting or time stamping quotes that you are definitely going to use later, in the analysis and synthesis. So, because I can tell you from experience of how I, get carried away with, in the past, I've gotten carried away with writing down all these notes. And then I was like, oh, I need to be recording like these quotes at the same time, not just like insights, but like actual quotes I want to use for these insights. So kind of doing, killing two birds with one stone, so to speak. So now here are the things. I know that this might seem like a lot of information and it might seem overwhelming. And it is a learning process. You just have to do one after another before you become really comfortable and it becomes like second nature. But what I would say is not to stress too much about, how perfect the test should be. I would say, if anything, just to try to avoid these mistakes as much as possible. Number one, talking too much, whether, in a moderated session, giving too much information or too much detail about the task, or going off into tangent questions that are not directly related to the test. Try to avoid that. And number one leads into number two, explaining the design of the task. Everybody learns differently. Every participant and user interprets things slightly differently. No two minds are exactly the same. But with that being said, there may be some participants who are anomalies and may not just understand at all how to do the task. And for those who will ask again and again exactly how to do a certain task or complete a task, that where our job is not there to help guide them to complete it. That is essentially for us to understand and to study that. And again, in most cases, people who absolutely do not understand or misinterpret a task, most of the time are anomalies, and we screen. Usually that's where screening is very helpful so that we don't really have that issue. But again, just to try to do your best to withhold from explaining exactly how to complete the task or the design, because that's not the objective. We want to test to make sure, is it actually easy to understand? Can this person complete what we want them to complete when they come to our website or our application or whatever it may be? So number three is also similar. I will say this though, in terms of working for companies, we have to try to be completely unbiased. And what helps with that too is usually when we're moderating, we we just use observer or our first name or initials. And we do not state that we are working with the company, because if we're testing for FedEx, for example, or Oracle, and the participant asks us, oh, are you an employee of FedEx? And if we were to say yes, sometimes that skews what their responses will be. So oftentimes we just say we're a moderator and we keep it at that. If they keep asking, we will, that rarely ever happens, but we just try to avoid talking about things like that, details that, don't really add any value to the test and actually would probably skew it. So trying to keep the environment as unbiased as possible is key. Number four, interviewing rather than testing. Again, this is, you're trying to have more of an open mind as a tester. You're not trying to ask questions to gear it in a certain way to looking for answers. You're trying to get out answers you're looking for. you're trying to have an open mind to really authentically test, the functionality and user experience quality of your prototype. And number 5, soliciting opinions or preferences. And so again, this can go directly talking about your own prototype, or if you're testing doing a comparative analysis where you're comparing it with other features or other websites or applications from other competing companies, and giving opinions or preferences on those as well can also skew and invite biases to the testing. So also trying to avoid that as well. Now, before I close and open it up for Q&A, I really want to share this video because I thought it was hilarious. Let me first take off my... Okay.
A crucial moment in the lifespan of the UX designer is the usability test.
Hold on.
This is where all the hard work can be rendered useless in a matter of seconds. One wrong move from the user, and it's back to the drawing board. Disaster has struck. This designer would...
Sorry, let me open this up. Here we go.
A crucial moment in the lifespan of the UX designer is the usability test. This is where all the hard work can be rendered useless in a matter of seconds. One wrong move from the user, and it's back to the drawing board. Disaster has struck. This designer will have to face a demoralizing process of coming up with a better solution.
Okay, so let me stop sharing my screen. So I hope you could hear that. I actually have not had much luck on sharing videos and sound through my share screen, but it's just a funny video. It won't be that discouraging, I hope. But either way, that is the purpose of a usability test, is to essentially find out whether or not the design works and if it works well. So it's okay if the results of your testing are not as quite as you had hoped, because that's the whole purpose, to improve the design. So yeah, if there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I'll start reading over some questions here from the YouTube live. Let's see. How do you go about recruiting participants in your job specifically? I think you talked about it a little bit, but if you can follow up, any advice for new UX designers on recruiting participants?
Ooh, so that is over here. I'm actually sharing to everyone in the chat. As I mentioned before, you have obviously the advantage working in a company where they have licensing to use these platforms, that does pretty much the recruiting for you. And all you have to do essentially is to set up the test, and it kind of like runs itself until it's complete. And you go in there and you review. And that's, again, for an unmoderated test. You can also do moderated testing for that as well. The downside is, like with usertesting.com, I don't think they actually have a free version for that. However, this link talks and gives the rundown of other platforms that do have free versions if you want to use a platform. Now, again, it's not 100%, it's not necessary to use a platform. It's just very useful. If you wanted to do your own usability, set up your own usability test, especially for like this design-a-thon, it's totally doable. You would just use whatever tool for example, that you have for, your design or your prototype, and you can record through Zoom or Microsoft Teams, or I believe there's, I don't even know how many video platforms there are now, but all of them can do recording. You obviously just want to ask and make sure first off if it's okay to record, and for them to share their screen while they're walking through the task or the questions that you're giving the participant. So you can definitely do it on your own. It's just probably a little bit more logistical. You'd have to figure it out, like, okay, like who's recording, how am I going to switch it off to, the participant, versus a platform that kind of already has that all built in. So I hope that answers your question, but I would definitely take a look at this link. It has a list of several tools out there that do provide a free version.
Yeah. As part of the Career Jumpstart program now, we partnered with usertesting.com, and they actually provide like each of the projects, like 3 free like participants. So it's been interesting to be able to provide that in a limited way, but it's like, I think it gives people more hands-on experience than what we had back in the day. There's a question here about Maze. Is Maze considered moderated testing?
Maze, I'm actually not familiar with that. Let me look that up.
I'm pretty sure it's unmoderated.
Okay.
I think it's the same as usertesting.com.
Yeah.
Way more modern and way better usability, but I'm pretty sure it's unmoderated.
Okay.
But yeah, so then let's see. Someone's asking here, if they're doing task analysis, can we test on friends or family members? So do you, in your opinion, like, is there any downside to testing with your family versus not? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I understand with the time constraint, you want to try to test with as many people as possible, or as many people that fit within your demographic, which could be difficult if you don't have you're not available or have readily accessible to those types of demographics. So with that being said, the one thing to keep in mind is the quality of the data. Because with your friends and family, which I'm sure are more than happy to help you out, it could possibly be a little bit more biased because they are your friends and family. So that's just something to keep in mind. I'm not saying like, no, you shouldn't, but it's just, something to think about. So I would, if at all possible, try to vary the participants you're getting. Like maybe if you do want to use some friends or family members, but then use some, if you post, for example, you need to recruit more people, post it on social media platforms, or asking your friends and family to post it on social media platforms, and tell them not to say that it's like, hey, this is my, relative that's trying to do this. It just should be just neutral. Anyone who wants to participate, and to try to get more variation of who's actually testing your prototype. I think that could work, having a variation.
Yeah. Awesome. So there's a question here. After you have tested a participant and made changes based on the results, do you typically then go back to the same participants to retest a new prototype, or do you try and find new participants?
That is also a good question. With FedEx, because this is a kind of a rule of thumb, a best practice that we do with our testing, is we only run it, and test with at least 2 people for each segment. So that's total, like anywhere from 4 to 6 people. And we watch and kind of reassess where we need to, if something wasn't quite as clear, or maybe we have another, question or tweak in the task that we want to put in there. And so after doing that, we actually don't test with the same people. The platform, goes out and finds other people who fit within the demographic we're looking for. But I understand, again, going back to what I was talking about before, for the time constraint and like trying to find the variation of people, if you're unable to use a platform to like find random people around the world to test your prototype, then I understand if you use the same people to retest.
And I think it's just best practice to not use them. Or if you're testing like 3 different options, you don't want the same person, because by the time they see the second option, they already saw the first option, right? So
Mhm.
the results get a little muddy there. But yeah, I think it's always good to test with new folks if you can, but if not, it's okay. What are some tools you recommend for unmoderated testing? So I know you shared a link, but are there any preferred ones or favorites that you have?
So I've used primarily usertesting.com and user Zoom. My preference is user testing. It has a lot of really cool features on there. I don't know if you're not familiar with it, I mean, you can definitely go on the website and check it out. And like Maka said, which is new to me, that there is, I think, does every participant in Designathon get, or is it just in the Career Jumpstart?
No, it's just a career jumpstart.
Okay.
Because we have limited seats. Yeah. And there's
So-
over 2,000 people
Doesn't-
in the design.
Okay.
Yeah.
So either way, you can go on the website. I can type it in here too, usertesting.com to check it out. But what's really cool about why I prefer usertesting.com is because for the recorded sessions, well, it records all the sessions, whether they're moderated or not. It actually like has a little bit of an AI. So it tries to already like pinpoint within the recording pain points, challenges, positive notes, negative notes, and you can always like click on it and read the transcription and mark if it correctly transcribed it or incorrectly transcribed it. And then it obviously learns as it goes. It's like a little bit of machine learning there. And then you can easily on the side pause and type notes and then make like certain other tags for those notes, which I mentioned in my presentation, like finding your own way to organize and tag and code is totally up to you. There is really no set rules for that. It's whatever works for you. But the reason why I like user testing is because it's trying to combine, it's trying to do at least some of the big bulk of the work for you, because some recordings it could take a long time, honestly. Even if it's like a 5-minute video and you're constantly like pausing, stopping, just to like write notes, that 5-minute video can turn into easily like 45 minutes to an hour of work of you just trying to extract that information. So it's a useful tool. And that's why I prefer using that.
Awesome. Let's see. Are there any websites that act as usability testing hubs? Meaning, are there sites where people can take usability tests instead of relying on our own networks all the time to gather info? So I think you've answered that, right? Like you're talking about user testing and user Zoom are both that, right? Like both of them recruit for you.
Yeah.
There's also companies that do recruiting. Like if you want to conduct your own testing, right? Like there's companies where you pay them a lot of money, probably like $50 to $150 for them to find you the specific people you need to then conduct the user test if you wanted to do a moderated user test as well. So those are like recruiting companies. We use those at one of my old jobs. There's a lot of thank yous. Thank you for the link. This is wonderful. Do you have any tips for testing with non-English speakers? Are there tools that help with multilingual tests? Or are any of these tools only for English speakers? No, right? Like you could create a...
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I haven't had an experience with this at FedEx or Oracle, but when I did like a freelance job for a few weeks, they used Userlytics, which is another platform that basically does the same thing for moderated on my moderated testing. And that specific job was to work with Spanish speakers. And so myself and another researcher were hired for the job because we are bilingual. And so the platform has no problem recording in another language. It's just the it doesn't have, that specific platform didn't have the auto transcription, so I can't really talk about that. But we essentially just used that to record an interview, because it was actually a moderated session. So it was like just like these user interviews. Actually, it wasn't a test, it was just user interviews. But then we kept those recordings and used them to make our notes. And then we had to translate those notes into English, because the company that hired us to do it is an American company. So I don't really know what tools have like that auto transcription for other languages, because again, not all of the platforms have that feature. But I mean, you can definitely do a user test or user testing in another language, but I would say you yourself as an observer or moderator would need to know that language. So
Yeah, I think that's good feedback. I've conducted interviews in Spanish before, and then the interview was fine, but when I had to transcribe those notes to English, I was like, oh God. There's a question here. Is there any difference between user testing and usability testing? And when is it the best time to conduct them? Same thing, right? Like,
yeah,
it's different ways of saying it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, best time to conduct testing.
Again, it really depends on what your overall goal is. Like if you're doing generative research, like for whether it's yourself or a company, and they're not entirely sure, they're looking for, insights, an opportunity to work from, then yeah, you can definitely lead with a test, whether it's testing your own product or prototype, or maybe doing a comparative analysis, or a competitive analysis, using another company or feature to test with. Or if it's not, the other way is honestly, you already have, a feature or something in mind, and this comes from doing user interviews or surveys, whatever it may be, and then you decide to create a prototype and then test that prototype. So there really is no it really does depend on what your goal is. And that will decide how you lead with the research. So I hope it's the best way I can answer. So I hope that was clear.
Yeah, I think that's good. Any tips for testing for accessibility? Would we usually do a test just for that, or would this be set up as a task in the main usability test? And how do we respectfully recruit those participants?
Oh, that's a really good question, because it's definitely realistic. At FedEx, they're actually trying to make it more of a priority for accessibility. And I can just speak to that. I am not on that team. However, I do know that they handle it on as a completely separate endeavor. So we don't, what I mean by that is it's tested completely separately, and the different types of prototypes are used for those participants as well. And obviously trying to combine those features based off the data. So, taking what you find out from the accessibility testing and applying that to the main prototype, because eventually you want to have a prototype that will serve both segments of people, or at least have the opportunity where, let's say on the prototype or the website, there is a button or a feature where it can then transition to increasing the text font, or, reading out, for those who, have problem with vision or hearing or whatever it may be. There's opportunity for the company to implement that. Recruiting for people, honestly, the screener is different, obviously. And I don't think people necessarily, you just use, politically correct terminology for those questions, but people typically have no problem responding to those, because they actually I would say from what I've seen firsthand, is most of the time they're more than happy to participate because they want improvement on accessibility. They want more products out there that serves them. So yeah, I wouldn't be too afraid about testing with those individuals who are within that group.
Yeah. I think that's awesome advice. What role does secondary data play in UX research, if at all? And I'm assuming they mean like secondary research and stuff like that. Yeah.
It's very helpful. I mean, first and foremost, because you're not starting from square one, you're not recreating the wheel, so to speak. So like, depending on what you're trying to test, it gives you more background information and it gives you more context on what has already been tested. So in a way, I view it as a launching pad. So, you know, and it's just beneficial because it can kind of, let's say, without doing secondary research, you might be, you know, asking a question or testing a question that has already been done recently, and you could have used that. That doesn't mean that you couldn't have tested the same thing, but it could have given you additional information or maybe something that you didn't even think about. And you're like, okay, so this person tested this, but not quite the way that perhaps they should have. And it gives you an idea, additional ideas of how to, or what to test for, what to look for. So I think that if anything, it helps you along your path of testing. It gives you more information to work from. So I think that's a huge plus and help by doing your research, your own research beforehand.
Yeah. Awesome. I think we've reached the end of the questions here. So thank you so much for joining us today, Morgan. Is there a way that folks can reach you? We can share your LinkedIn maybe.
Yeah.
If anybody has any questions, does that work?
Yeah, let me actually get it up there. I don't have it readily open, but yeah, let me go ahead and share my LinkedIn. I know that not everyone watching is part of the Avocadomy program, Foundations program, but if you are, I have my own Slack channel too, where I specifically talk about all things UX research. I'm more than happy to. So
awesome.
But you can also just reach out to me on my LinkedIn as well. There it is. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I just shared that LinkedIn, and hopefully you'll get a couple of new connections and people will reach out if they have any questions about UX research.